So, good evening, everyone. My name is Iain Clacher. I'm a Professor of Pensions and Finance at Leeds University Business School, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to the fourth and final event in the Meet the Researchers Achieving Net Zero webinar series. It's been developed by the Alumni Development Team and in partnership with the university's Priestley International Centre for Climate Change. In 2019, the UK government introduced groundbreaking legislation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. This was informed by the net zero recommendations from the Climate Change Committee, and these recommendations were underpinned by a wealth of research from the University of Leeds. Since then, we've witnessed a wave of net zero commitments from nations, cities, businesses and investors. The University of Leeds itself announced ambitious commitments to reduce its own carbon footprint to net zero by 2030 and focus its teaching, research and engagement on addressing the grand challenge of climate change. Our net zero research spans three key areas of action: decarbonising our energy supply, reducing our demands for energy services, and the capture and removal of emissions. Researchers are also focused on three cross-cutting fundamental principles: ensuring a just transition, resilience to the impacts of a changing climate, and delivering multiple co-benefits. The researchers who have contributed to this series have offered excellent insight into some of the important work that's underway at the University of Leeds. All of the previous webinars in the series can be found on the Leeds Alumni YouTube channel. Today, I'm delighted to welcome you to the fourth and final researcher in the Meet the Researchers Achieving Net Zero series, Dr. Mark Davis. Mark is an economic sociologist and associate professor here at the university and has led a number of large interdisciplinary research projects in the UK and Europe to develop new business models and financial innovations to deliver net zero. His research created Community Municipal Investments to fund local green projects, which will be the focus of tonight's webinar. Please do type questions as Mark's presenting, and we'll address these at the end. And we're hoping for a very interactive and engaging session. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Iain. Hello, everyone. Let me start by just taking the opportunity to publicly congratulate Iain and also Jason Lowe on the announcement, I think last month, that Leeds has been successful in becoming one of the physical hubs for the new UK Centre for Greening Finance and Investment, which is a fantastic achievement for the University of Leeds and puts all of us right at the forefront of helping the finance sector to support delivery of a net zero economy. So as Iain mentioned, I'm Dr. Mark Davis. I'm an economic sociologist here at Leeds, and my research is evaluating the potential of place-based green finance initiatives to help meet net zero obligations. So I'm also a Leeds alum myself, having been awarded my master's and my doctorate here, and I continue to give a little each month to support the work of our fantastic alumni and development team at Leeds. So I offer my thanks to A&D and to the Priestley International Centre for inviting me to speak, and also to each of you from our alumni community who have taken the time to join us this evening or maybe this morning from your own particular location around the world. Now, I've been asked to speak specifically on this question of community funding for the climate crisis because my research at Leeds has long been interested in developing alternative finance models to meet the century's grand challenges. Put simply, what we do with our money matters. If we want the world to be fairer, more inclusive and more sustainable in pursuit of a just transition to net zero societies, then we're going to have to do different things with our money. So in the next 25 minutes or so of your time, I'm going to focus this closing webinar in the Net Zero series by looking at my 2019 project Financing for Society, which was funded by the UK government's Inclusive Economy Unit, because that was the research project that led to the co-creation of Community Municipal Investments, or CMIs. Now, I'll say a little bit more about these later, but in essence, CMIs are a new model of alternative finance for local councils that are already helping to drive community funding into local net zero projects. By necessity, then, I am going to speak a little bit about local authority borrowing arrangements. So I politely ask you to stick with me, because I promise in 25 minutes' time, my story has something of a happy ending. Let's start with just a few lines on a not so happy topic, though, just to begin, by stressing the scale of the local net zero financing challenge. Since 2010, UK councils have lost on average 60 pence in the pound of central funding under the austerity measures imposed on the public sector by successive administrations. Now, that situation hasn't improved any given the local impact of the global pandemic, and the latest estimates we have are that this figure could have risen to as much as 80 pence in the pound in many areas of the UK. So when we think about financing local net zero infrastructure projects to tackle the climate crisis, UK councils, in seeking to address that, will typically borrow from a body known as the Public Works Loan Board, or the PWLB, when looking to finance those net zero schemes. Back in October 2019, however, the Treasury increased the cost of PWLB borrowing by 100 base points, or 1% to you and me, placing another hard squeeze on local government finances. It jumped from 1.8% to 2.8% in terms of what it cost the council. Now, at the same time, we know that it's councils who are on the front line of actually delivering the tangible green and social projects we need to hit regional net zero targets. And around 80% of councils in the UK have declared a climate emergency. Now, one of the biggest challenges that councils face beyond the financing problem is typically only around 10 to 15% of their local residents know that such a climate emergency has been declared, and even fewer have a simple, sensible answer to a question that I hear all the time in my research, which is, I really care about the climate, but what can I do about it? It seems such a vast global problem. What can I as an individual do differently in order to contribute in some meaningful way to tackling this grand challenge head on? So there's clearly a finance challenge and a citizen engagement challenge when it comes to delivering net zero. And addressing both of those was the task that I set myself here at Leeds, where I led a team in asking, if local governments urgently need new sources of stable long-term financing, and they need it now, and in a way that is inclusive of as many local people as possible who can be empowered to feel part of a just transition to a net zero society, then where might that funding come from? Now, a number of previous research projects that I'd led at the university focused on the UK as a global leader in the alternative finance sector. My 2019 Financing for Society project therefore set out to test investment-based crowdfunding as a new model of public sector finance. The UK's alternative finance sector, which encompasses all models of crowdfunding and peer-to-peer lending, was valued at 6.2 billion in 2018. So that seemed like a really significant sector to explore in relation to addressing the financing challenge, and initially led to me working with the UK regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, to understand the motivations of those individuals who had self-certified as being sophisticated investors and who were already active and operating in these alternative finance markets. What had motivated them to get involved? What was driving their decision, and how had they found their experience, and how had they learned to trust or to manage their engagement with these kind of alternative finance platforms? So working with the Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance, I led a team at Leeds whereby we interviewed 52 investors and heard about a range of significant motivating factors that became really relevant to thinking through net zero infrastructure investment. First, people's desire to create a legacy, something that I know is really important to our fantastic alumni community at Leeds. Time and again, we heard that investors were concerned about the future of society and the environment for their grandchildren. Now, interestingly, it was never their children that they were particularly worried about, something that as a sociologist I was desperate to probe further, but professional and research ethics sadly got in the way of me asking those more personal questions. In legacy terms, these people saw crowdfunding investments as a way to deliver more transparent green and social outcomes through infrastructure projects, typically investing in the renewable energy sector. Secondly, investors also revealed a deep commitment to place, either a particular neighbourhood, a city, or a region, as being a powerful motivating factor in diversifying their portfolio in order to move more of their money in supporting local projects in those communities, in those places. Now, this was potentially a long distance attachment to place. For example, one investor told us that she only invested in projects in her home county of Yorkshire now that she was living overseas, and good on that lass for doing so. Many of you as well retain a close commitment to Leeds as a city and to the university, despite living in different parts of the globe. So that long distance attachment to place is something that I'm sure you feel very tangibly, very connected to. More often, this commitment was driven by a desire to support the improvement of local infrastructure, an instinct that has likely only been intensified now that each of us has spent exactly 12 months to the day locked down at various points in our communities as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, and have each developed a renewed appreciation, I think, for what it is that our local communities have to offer us in terms of our well-being and in terms of accessible green spaces, and what maybe some of our areas are lacking and would benefit from further investment in. So against that background of researching motivations and incentives in the alternative finance sector, I really wanted to test whether or not crowdfunding could be used as a viable model for the public sector to help to plug that central financing gap in delivering on those local net zero ambitions. And this became the Financing for Society project. So my team included the crowdfunding platform Abundance Investment and the Cross Whitehall Group local partnerships. We worked inside 3 NHS organisations and 3 local councils over a period of 18 months. We really wanted to understand from the inside the barriers and opportunities to financing projects to meet the declared ambitions of the various climate emergency strategies that had been announced. So we worked in particular with councils in Bristol, the Isle of Wight, and here in Leeds, first to create a new decision tool to help guide different internal council teams in evaluating models of crowdfunding against a range of project delivery and procurement scenarios. Quite simply, councils are too capacity pressed to engage with something like alternative finance structures, and I think understandably can be somewhat risk averse in taking the time to understand how such models might work to their particular benefit. What we learned through the research was that any alternative way of raising funds from the community for the council's benefit would need to match both the administrative and capital costs of their existing borrowing channels, such as the PWLB, which I mentioned before, which at the start of the project was quite a gauntlet to have thrown down to us. But we continue to work with a wide network of professional service partners as well, which are shown here at the bottom of the slide. to help us in understanding the kind of technical assessment of the legal, financial and regulatory environment for the use of crowdfunding in the public sector. Now, that assessment raised some initial concerns for the NHS organisations in our study, linked to the particular way in which NHS borrowing rules are different by being tied to national debt and GDP figures. But that assessment did open up a viable space for local councils, which was really exciting. As such, we tested the viability of different crowdfunding models against 3 live procurement scenarios that were all tied to particular local net zero ambitions. So there was a major retrofit scheme in Bristol, looking at particularly at council-owned buildings, a green redevelopment project that included a walk-in health centre in the Isle of Wight, and a rooftop solar PV installation on council properties here in Leeds. The second phase of the research led to my team co-creating with these 3 councils and with the platform Abundance this new model of place-based citizen finance, which we called Community Municipal Investments, or CMIs. Now, I'll say a little bit more about CMIs shortly, but put simply, they are a new type of local government bond that is ring-fenced for green and social projects within the council's wider community. Now, crucially, this is not a gift-based or a donation-based crowdfunding model, which I think is often what we imagine when we first hear the term crowdfunding. Most of us will have given money to friends and family for various charity appeals, and some of us are even foresighted enough to give to universities in support of good and noble causes. CMIs are different. They're a new model of finance for local government, backed by a business model that uses debt or equity structures to provide a meaningful financial return to those who are prepared to invest. So at a time when high street banks are offering typically less than 1% interest to retail investors via traditional savings accounts or cash ISAs, and for investments, let's be honest, that are fairly opaque and often misaligned when it comes to prioritising net zero targets, CMIs are intended to offer a stable and transparent alternative for the general public to put small pots of their own money to better use in helping to tackle the climate crisis locally. So just before I come to exactly how CMIs are structured, I want first to establish their potential scope for driving regional investment. I'll focus upon Leeds, since this is a city that each of us is incredibly fond of as an alumni community, and that enjoys a proactive local government with a clear climate emergency mission for its 800,000 or so citizens. Now, using public data from the Office for National Statistics and Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, we were able to estimate that those proud Loyner citizens of Leeds collectively hold around 14 billion of investable wealth within high street cash investment and savings products that are often delivering precious little in terms of financial or environmental return. We also know from a separate national survey that was led by the government's Department for International Development and the ethical bank Triodos that around 10% of people across the UK self-identify as being ethical investors. So admittedly, as crude as the calculation is, we can at least estimate that there is potentially up to 1.4 billion of investable wealth that could be moved via a CMI model to support local green and social projects just in the city of Leeds, which would clearly be transformative for the region's net zero ambitions. Abundance's own analysis of the market potential and likely fundraising target for individual infrastructure projects has estimated that CMIs could raise as much as 3 billion if they were to be taken up by all 343 local authorities in England. So finally, after much trailing, What exactly is a CMI? It's a very fair question. Well, they are long-term investments, anything from 5 to 30 years, with a fixed annuity payment to investors at either 6 or 12 monthly intervals. They're issued by local governments via a crowdfunding platform and are tied to specific net zero projects in the local region. So, for example, we've seen solar panels and retrofit schemes already, but also charging points for electric vehicles, as well as various rewilding and tree planting initiatives along transport links, for example. The cost of borrowing for local governments using the CMI is lower than the Public Works Loan Board, which I mentioned before. The administrative and capital costs had to match in order for this to be viable for councils. And crucially, is also intended to provide councils with a viable alternative to using complex and shareholder optimizing structures, such as private finance initiatives or other public-private partnership schemes, which often don't get a great deal of positive coverage in the national press. Crucially, citizens that choose to invest take local government risk, not project risk. And this is a really important point to stress. A key kind of social justice principle for me that drew upon my earlier work with the Financial Conduct Authority, whereby my research had contributed directly to rule changes, was the need to provide greater investor protections in crowdfunding markets. I didn't feel that it was part of a just transition to encourage community to become investors and to help to fund net zero projects for a financial return without at the same time increasing levels of protection for new investors when inviting them to put their capital at risk. So what that means is that with the CMI, the risk that investors are taking is that the local government itself will continue to exist, not that an individual infrastructure project will succeed. So in betting that your local council will still be around at the end of the period of investment, you're taking about as low a risk as one can imagine. So the 1 to 1.5% return reflects that low risk and is equivalent to national gilt markets. The community municipal investment structure, nevertheless, still aims to provide a better rate of financial return to citizens than is presently being offered by most high street products, whilst also generating tangible social and environmental returns by transparently helping to fund real projects in local communities. Now, one of the most exciting possibilities of the CMI model, I think, is the opportunity for local people as community funders to walk or cycle past the shiny new solar panels on the local school and to know that it was their money retained locally for a net zero infrastructure project and for which they are already receiving a financial return that helped to make that happen. Being able to see the impact of what your money is making happen is a real kind of benefit to this kind of model that you don't get with high street finance products typically. Now, because we wanted to ensure as many people as possible can experience that warm glow effect, CMIs are designed to be socially inclusive with a minimum investment threshold of just £5. Now, whilst the financial return on investment is clearly negligible at that level, there are social benefits of supporting place-based projects. Participating even at that minimum threshold also provides a simple, sensible answer to the question that I posed right at the start, namely, I care about the climate, but what can I do about it as an individual? So in each of these ways, the offer of a CMI also opens up new channels of communication between local governments and their citizens about the urgency of net zero targets in the region. This is important because, as I mentioned at the start as well, the second part of the challenge we set ourselves was to increase citizen engagement in local climate emergency objectives. Social research elsewhere has also shown that residents have higher levels of trust in their local council the more varied points of contact and communication that exists between them. Now, as a member of the Priestley International Centre myself, I know how vital it is that we deliver a just transition to net zero, and therefore CMIs are closely aligned with those core principles. To give just a few examples, first would be in empowering those who are affected by the change, principally via that £5 minimum investment threshold being highly accessible to most residents. A recent survey by the Place-Based Climate Action Network, or PCAN, which is also a part of the Priestley Centre here at the university, found that adults in the segments lower wealth and low financial confidence had a higher than average appetite to lend money to local authorities because they trusted those local authorities and understood the kind of work that they were doing. I also recently secured a new Innovate UK grant to explore how CMIs could enable the wealthier, able to pay segments of our community to roll their annuity payments back into local authorities in order to help finance other non-core projects, this time using a donation-based crowdfunding model. This was something that we explored with the sophisticated investors in the FCA project, where we were told that people would be quite willing to give up the interest at 1%, 1.5%, if they felt like their money was going to something that they believed in, if there was a really transparent alignment between their money and their values. So to honour my promise of a happy ending as I start to draw to a close, for you patiently listening to more about local council borrowing options than anyone should reasonably have to endure on a Tuesday evening, I'm proud to report that the UK's first 2 CMIs were launched last autumn and have already moved 2 million of investable wealth into local net zero projects. West Berkshire Council in the rural and relatively wealthy south of England launched the UK's first CMI back in July and asked residents to invest over 5 years at a return rate of 1.2% to support 2 rooftop solar projects. And rather than me going through and telling you exactly how well that process worked, I'm going to ask Kathleen to share a short video that was produced by the council on the impact of the CMI.
Hello. In July 2019, West Berkshire Council declared a climate emergency, committing ourselves to working towards a net zero carbon emissions position by the year 2030. Since then, we've engaged with residents and other stakeholders, holding a climate conference in 2019. This is where lots of different groups came together, including policymakers, residents, campaign groups and others, consulting on and delivering our environment strategy, which set out the roadmap to carbon neutrality. The council identified a number of projects which would significantly reduce its carbon footprint, such as the installation of photovoltaic panels at suitable sites in the district. We concluded that crowdfunding through a CMI, that's Community Municipal Investment, or what everyone calls a climate bond, would have the most beneficial outcome for district's taxpayers and support projects helping to deliver carbon neutrality, as well as providing other benefits. So, in July 2020, West Berkshire Council was the first UK local authority to issue a Community Municipal Investment. CMIs can be used to supplement, diversify or replace sources of borrowing to fund specific infrastructure projects or even to refinance existing debt. Overall, 640 individual investors took up the bond, and we were delighted to raise the target £1 million financing a few days before the scheduled closing date in October 2020. Using this innovative funding approach, we're already experiencing the benefits. The proceeds were invested in solar panels on 6 different sites in West Berkshire, as well as the expansion of walking and cycling routes, upgraded LED street lighting and urban tree planting in the district. Here come the stats. The solar panels are already generating clean electricity at a rate of 386,388 kilowatt hours per annum, which saves carbon dioxide emissions of 90 tonnes per annum. Officers in our environment team have learned a huge amount about the suitability of buildings and grid networks for solar photovoltaic deployment. Their project management skills have been enhanced, their confidence increased, and relationships with schools and other stakeholders much improved. It's also hugely improved the council's engagement with its community, with the powerful effect of residents being able to physically see the results of their investment, as well as the speed with which the funds were invested. Overall, residents can enjoy a low-risk financial return, the district itself is generating cleaner and greener energy, and the council has access to cheaper borrowing than would otherwise have been the case. It really is a win-win for all involved.
So what's really exciting about the West Berkshire case, as you've just heard there, is not only the tangible benefits for local residents, but also the speed with which the financing has gone into delivering net zero projects. The scheme in West Berkshire has led to the council being nominated for a Green Council Award, which will be a decision will be made on which later this year. So I personally wish them every success with that. But obviously the research that we've done here at Leeds in creating the CMI has led to these kind of tangible benefits in the local community. Excuse me. Alongside the West Berkshire case in Warrington Borough Council launched the UK's second CMI and also hit their own £1 million target, this time 3 days early. This scheme attracted 500 residents with an average investment of almost £2,000 each, with the CMI helping to fund a £10 million solar and battery storage project near Cirencester. What's interesting for the Warrington scheme is the electricity and revenues being generated by the solar panels will be used to accelerate other green projects for Warrington's community as part of its wider green energy strategy, including measures to reduce fuel poverty. So again, a real core part of that just transition process. So where next? Still in collaboration with the platform Abundance, I'm continuing to work with over 50 councils around the UK who are at various stages of the process for launching a CMI. 13 are actively moving to Senate level agreements before this summer as the scale of the recovery from COVID-19 and the necessity of delivering local net zero targets becomes clear to more and more people. Put simply, we're going to have to mobilise wealth held within our communities in new ways in order to build back stronger and greener than before. And speaking of our community brings us right back home to Leeds City Council, who are a major contributor to the underlying research behind CMIs and who've shown considerable leadership and foresight throughout the process. As I mentioned before, Leeds were a Pathfinder case study in the original project, and if he'll forgive me, knowing that this is being recorded, Tom Noland at the council in particular deserves huge credit for seeing the potential of place-based investment for the city and the wider region. The offer of the CMI in Leeds has been approved. The council is just currently scoping for the most suitable infrastructure project to finance in that way. So I'm hopeful that research done by Leeds, in Leeds, and for the people of Leeds, albeit led by a chap from Bradford, will see the City Council take the opportunity to help society to finance a rapid transition to net zero by mobilising local community funding through making its CMI offer to residents. Now, given that's a frantic run through 5 years of my research, I'm just going to ask Kathleen to move the slide on. It's not working for me anymore. Thank you. To point to 3 reports on CMI that are freely available online, should you wish to know more. I know these have been put into the chat function for you as well. The original Financing for Society report, an evaluation of CMIs that was done by PCAN, and the 2020 UK Climate Change Committee's report on the road to net zero finance, which identified CMIs as one of the breakthrough innovations needed to ensure that market innovation responds to the scale of the net zero financing challenge. I'll stop there. Thank you to everyone for listening, and I'll hand back to Iain.
So thank you, Mark. That was absolutely fantastic. Very engaging. Sorry, I get distracted listening to you, which is always a good sign when the chair's really engrossed. So we've had quite a few questions come in, but I would like to start with one of the pre-submitted ones, which is, why do you see local government is so pivotal in achieving net zero? And I think that starts to maybe capture some of the things in the chat as well.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thanks, Iain. So I think there's a need for a national strategy, and we've heard recently of the new infrastructure investment bank that's going to be based in Leeds, which is a really exciting kind of opportunity for the city. But crucially, I think as part of the wider kind of devolution agenda, where we're going to get our West Yorkshire mayor very soon in this area. I think there's need for real local oversight on exactly what kind of projects in which parts of a city region are needed. And for me, that's a strategic decision for the local authority and the combined authority to be able to take. And I think, part of the problem in not having delivered on net zero ambitions so far is at least in part the requirement for local decisions to go into Whitehall to be approved and then to come back out again. And I think that is frustrating for local government. And CMIs are a way of helping to empower the local councils to be able to move more swiftly, not just because of the provision of some of the financing that's necessary, but actually in taking the local population with them as well. So that kind of communication challenge around engaging local citizens in the importance of net zero is something that local councils are really well placed to kind of manage. The other side of that, I think, is on the crowdfunding point. There's a lot of really impressive community crowdfunding projects that are led by local residents, and we see a lot of this in the kind of community energy space. They do, clearly do fantastic work and deliver infrastructure, but one of the potential risks of a community-based approach is that you tend to find that they spring up in those areas of a city region where there's already a lot of resource available. It's people who've got the finances, the knowledge, the experience, the time, the wherewithal, the confidence to be able to mobilize locally to deliver a particular project. And so through no fault of their own, what you can end up doing is seeing the relatively better off parts of an area further improve, whereas those areas that might be less well resourced don't have the opportunity for those infrastructure improvements. And so I think there's a really strategic role for the local government to say, okay, even at a £5 minimum threshold, it may well be that most of your investment comes from the wealthy areas of the city, but there's no reason why the infrastructure we deliver has to be there as well. It could be in those parts of a city region that need further redevelopment and regeneration. And I think that strategic oversight is really key for local authorities. So there's some of the reasons why I think they're strategically really useful.
That's great. So looking at the questions, the top rated question so far is, how are profits generated from these low carbon infrastructure projects to be able to generate the returns on investment, since many of them are about energy or emission saving rather than costs?
Yep. So part of that is to do with the margin that's created through the rate of return that's offered to the investors and the actual cost of the council in delivering the infrastructure project. So the margin is typically created there. So we often get asked 1%, 1.5% is actually quite low for a crowdfunding investment. Typically I can get 4 to 6%. If I look to invest in another scheme. So in holding the the rate of return at that level, not only are we reflecting the risk profile, as I mentioned, you're essentially investing on the assumption that the council will continue to exist rather than an individual project will succeed or fail. The margin that's created is where that return is able to be generated. And again, excuse me, in fixing annuity payments over the course of the term, that also gives the council some flexibility in managing the rest of its finances to make sure that those margins are generated.
Brilliant. So we've got a question which is possibly also a suggestion from Dom Samways. Is there potential for a direct debit system in the same way that people might give monthly to a charity? So is there an opportunity to do monthly investment in local sustainability improvements through these structures?
That's a really good question. We actually haven't looked at direct debit, although I'm definitely going to do that now. So thank you for that suggestion. What we have looked at is whether or not it could in some way be linked to council tax payments. So some people clearly pay for council tax through direct debits as well, rather than a kind of single annual payment, or they'll pay quarterly. And whether it's possible to do that. There's no technical or financial barrier to doing it that way. But what we found is that in in speaking to potential kind of investors and existing investors, in linking it to council tax payments, you frame the investment in a very different way. So it seems as if it's something the council is taking off you, rather than something you're kind of actively investing in for a financial return. So it's less about the technical feasibility of doing it that way, and more about how people frame their engagement with the council and with council tax. So, we've done, there's some great research going on elsewhere at Leeds. Anna Barker and others in the law school have done really interesting work on how to use crowdfunding for regeneration of public space and parks. And one of the challenges that we've come across is people's understanding of what the council does is often ring-fenced as being parks, bins, and police or emergency services. And so we're trying to find a different way, a different communication channel for councils that isn't just the council tax statement, that opens up the possibility of creating a different kind of conversation with residents about becoming active investors in their local community. So at the moment, we haven't looked at direct debits in that way, but in principle, I guess there's no reason why it couldn't be structured in that way.
Yeah, that's great. So we've got a question from Michael Whitehouse, which is 1 to 1.5% is fine for a project with zero risk, but the risk isn't zero, so who underwrites it? A number of projects will in reality fail, so where does the missing money come from?
Yep, good question. So the reason why you're essentially taking council risk rather than project risk is because the council will underwrite the security of that investment as well. So in the same way that they would do with any kind of council project, the risk is not held by the investor in that way. You're not taking zero risk. Many councils at the moment are, as I've said right at the start, facing a real kind of squeeze on their finances. So it's not, your capital is at risk as it is with any kind of investment. But in holding the return at that level, what we're saying is sophisticated investors who would typically pursue a 4 to 6 or more % return will likely look at this and think, that's too low for me, I'm not particularly interested, which is fine. We would hope that the net zero ambition of those projects would encourage people to get involved even at that level. But we're kind of looking at the retail investor end of the market, where people are holding, potentially huge sums of money in poorly performing savings accounts, current accounts, and cash ISAs that are delivering them 0.75%, for example. At which point 1.5% seems quite attractive, and you've got a far more transparent relationship with what it is your money is delivering, rather than holding it in an account for which you don't know where that money is kind of being leveraged and sent on to. So you're quite right. It's a really good question. It's not zero risk, I guess, is the first thing to say. The council underwrites the investment the same as it would in any other way, but the rate of return is held to reflect that kind of risk profile, and it is more retail investor faced than sophisticated investor faced. Although, just to round the point out, the data that we've got on the West Berkshire and the Warrington raises have shown that it is this kind of blended return that investors are looking for that's really appealed. It is sophisticated investors as well as retail investors that have got involved because of the promise of, I know that my money's putting solar panels on the local school, or it's putting LED lighting into the local street infrastructure. So it's that net zero ambition, that mix of motivations that I mentioned we'd come across in the work with the FCA that's really helped to build the kind of, the structure of the CMI in the way that it's been designed.
No, that's great. So we've also got a question here from David Suckley, which is, can investment in schemes such as Warrington's be meaningfully translated into tons of CO2 saved?
Yes, but I am not the person with the necessary quantitative skills to be able to do that. I'm sure I have colleagues right across campus who can do that. I do know that one of the things the council are really keen to do in communicating the success of not just of CMIs but of their wider kind of net zero strategy is how their various schemes are translated into CO2 removal from the atmosphere. So you're quite right in stating that as a really important metric. But the ability to calculate that sits way beyond my level of expertise. But there are people doing that, because as with any renewable energy project, that's often the key metric in terms of how successful it's been. So I'm sure West Berkshire and Warrington and Leeds in time will be doing those kind of calculations. Absolutely.
Brilliant. So we have a question from Mark Davies, which is, if 22% of funds in West Berkshire came from local individuals, where did the balance come from? Were these CMIs open to institutions or individuals from further afield? Did you experiment with any kind of match funding, challenge funding models?
Yeah, very good question. From what sounds like my namesake. So thank you, Mark, for the question. You're quite right. So 22% came from local residents, which, as I mentioned just now in response to the earlier question, is kind of focused towards the more retail investor end of that spectrum. The remaining 78% came from sophisticated investors. So they were either people who, on one level, were already invested in other projects through the crowdfunding platform. So through Abundance, they were Abundance investors and saw this as another opportunity to support that kind of project. But also, the money did come from outside of West Berkshire as well, because as I mentioned with regards to the alumni community, you don't have to be in Leeds to care about Leeds. And clearly there's a significant incentive there, either from a kind of expat West Berkshire community who are now living elsewhere nationally or globally, who wanted to support something that the council were the first to do, kind of sector leader in that way, retained another form of commitment to the local area, but also people who just were interested in supporting the net zero ambition of the local council. I should say, because it's an interesting question on the matched funding point. We in the original research, which you can read in the Financing for Society report, we did experiment with a kind of postcode, kind of an IPO linked to postcode. Would there be an initial offering to people within the kind of surrounding area within the borough, and then move to a kind of wider kind of geographical range of people? But for understandable reasons, the councils were quite nervous of doing that. Why would they turn down money towards their target to deliver the solar panels if there were lots of investors outside of the borough who wanted to invest? And we got a pretty decent mix of local and outside investors for, as I say, what is a brand new structure launched in a period of pretty acute economic uncertainty. So to even hit sort of 22% of local people before the council was able to really mobilise a significant kind of communications plan, given everything that was happening with COVID, I think is, we've taken it, and I know the council have, as the video shows, as a real kind of success and a bit of a platform really for what the council can go on to do in financing other projects as part of its climate emergency strategy.
So next question, how would a local authority get started with launching a CMI? Person asking actually works for a local authority in the climate air quality team and would love to take this to management as they develop their net zero roadmap. I suspect that's an email, but I'll let you answer.
Really grateful for the question. Please get in touch. I'm, as I mentioned, I'm kind of formally working with around 50 councils at the moment, and a number of combined authorities as well. Part of that is an initial conversation between us with regards to what it is you're looking for. Within the Financing for Society report, and I know there's a link that's been provided for you. The decision tool that I mentioned that we devised to start with has been really instrumental in giving different council teams the opportunity to sit down and talk to a particular document that says, it takes you through a kind of a tree system of what kind of project are you looking for? Yes, no. What kind of crowdfunding model might work best for you, and who to go and speak to. But it's definitely a conversation with myself, which I'd be very happy to take. So yeah, please drop me an email or get in touch on Twitter, and we can take that forward. But one of the things we've learned from councils so far is that you can achieve an awful lot if you've got one or two internal champions who are prepared to go and speak to the finance team, the legal team, the treasury team, the environment strategy team, and kind of start to build a little bit of momentum. It's been really encouraging to see how quickly and positively some councils have been able to move once they've got those teams on board. So yeah, very happy to help support you with that.
So there's a question from Josie, I think. So apologies if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. How does this affect current procurement processes within local authorities?
Excellent question. I don't think I know the gentleman involved, but that's an excellent plug for a new project that I was awarded just before Christmas with the UK Energy Research Centre, looking specifically at financial innovation for public procurement processes. So one of the things that we want to look at in that project is to what extent it's possible for councils to be able to include the requirement, or probably the suggestion for what we've heard so far, that those tendering for contracts have considered the possibility of a community financing element in their strategy for delivering a given project. So at the moment, it doesn't impact on how the council procures for a given infrastructure project, but we would like to, and then this wasn't part of the original kind of research, but where we want to take it is exactly to kind of look at that particular question and how we can help alternative finance structures become a more central part of that procurement conversation, because I think it's really important that there isn't just an assumption that the PWLB or a kind of PFI scheme are the only viable options in delivering infrastructure projects, and that there are kind of tangible social and environmental benefits to looking at and evaluating the potential of a community financing scheme, such as a CMI or other models that could be out there, community shares, for example, which Leeds has done fantastic work around the Leeds Community Housing Project. These schemes need to be part of that conversation, absolutely, but it's not something we've yet looked at.
So I've just had my 5-minute warning, so we've only got a couple of questions left. So I'm going to put these two together. So there's a question from Michael Whitehouse and also one from Richard Smelt. So isn't there a risk that allowing some types of projects to be funded locally will lead to inefficient investment or even counterproductive investment versus a national strategy? Climate change isn't a local problem, but a national and global one. And then Richard's point is, are local governments seen as efficient investors? Why waste investments on local government bureaucracy?
Yes, two questions there, where maybe my answer on local governments right at the top has persuaded you that might be a good idea. Maybe it hasn't. You're quite right. I think so. The national strategy is definitely needed, and I think taking seriously the point about the net zero challenge being a global strategy, that there's probably an argument for a supranational strategy as well, for how we do this. And certainly, the COP26 event that's coming to Glasgow is a real opportunity for the UK to showcase its kind of global ambitions for how we need international partnerships and agreements to deliver on these targets. But I would reiterate the point that responsibility for delivering projects has, even within a national strategy, even within the the industrial strategy that seems to have somewhat withered in recent times, perhaps understandably, but has kind of disappeared into the background a little bit, is the requirement for that to be devolved down. And so there is a question and a debate to be had over whether or not an infrastructure project in Leeds is best decided upon in terms of what kind of project and what kind of efficiencies are required by the local government in Leeds, or by Whitehall, or by a kind of national kind of organisation or strategy document. And for me, I want those decisions made locally. I see a real benefit in local government and local communities working together, you know, potentially within a national framework, but certainly not in sort of a national framework for local governments to actually deliver in areas of need, and to understand what the community wants and what the community need. I think is far better done at that municipal level rather than in terms of you know, kind of arm's length strategy from Whitehall. In terms of efficiencies, you know, that's a really good point, and I think, you know, time will tell. I was really nervous this time last year that, given the lockdown starting, that we wouldn't get the opportunity for CMIs to be anything other than a good idea on paper. We'd done all the work, we had councils signed up, it looked like maybe they weren't going to be launched. So I think it's to the huge credit of West Berkshire and Warrington that they've gone ahead in that context. And I think, you know, over the next little while, it'll be for us to assess how efficient those investments have been, and maybe where improvements can be made. But certainly from the initial data, you know, they've been fantastically efficient ways of getting those projects moving really swiftly. You know, the solar panels are already on the roof. The school is already benefiting from reduced energy costs. That is going into the school being able to invest in other things as well. You know, I think these are not to be discounted as wider benefits to this particular kind of model. Clearly, at scale, that there'll be a question to be looked at in terms of the, you know, the wider efficiencies of that. But yeah, at the moment, I'm pretty confident that they're well structured and well managed in that way.
Fantastic. So I think I'll draw things to a close because we've got 2 minutes left. So thank you very much, Mark. That was absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed that. So a virtual round of applause is due, very much so.
Thanks, Ian. And thanks everyone for coming along. I really appreciate your time in listening and asking such great questions. It's yeah, it's been a pleasure to speak to you. So I'll leave Ian to close the webinar.
Thank you. So as Mark says, I've got to sort of close this off, so I don't really have a lot to say. I do hope that you all found it as interesting as I did, and thank you for all your contributions and your time, and I hope you have a great evening or a great day depending on where you are. So thank you all.